Mozi begins his philosophy with an observation that seems almost impossible to deny. Most of the suffering in the world does not appear out of nowhere. It grows from the way people treat one another. Wars begin because rulers value conquest over human life. Families break apart because people care only for themselves. Communities weaken because selfishness is rewarded while concern for others is ignored. If these habits could be changed, much of human misery could disappear with them. Philosophy, therefore, should not exist merely to satisfy curiosity. It should improve the way people live. This practical spirit separates Mozi from many other philosophers. He has little interest in ideas that sound impressive but accomplish nothing. A belief should be judged by its consequences. Does it reduce suffering? Does it create peace? Does it make ordinary life better for ordinary people? If the answer is no, then even the most elegant theory has failed its purpose. Wisdom must prove itself through action. From this starting point, he develops one of the boldest ideas in ancient Chinese philosophy. Human beings naturally care most about themselves and those closest to them. Parents protect their children before anyone else's. Friends help friends. Families look after their own interests. While this is understandable, Mozi believes it also creates countless conflicts. When everyone values only their own group, every other group becomes less important. The same thinking that protects one family can eventually justify harming another. Expanded far enough, it becomes the foundation of violence between communities and even between nations. His answer is a principle often described as impartial care. The idea is simple to state but difficult to practice. Instead of limiting concern to those who are close, people should learn to extend genuine care toward others as well. Every person's life has value, not only the lives of those connected by blood, friendship, or power. A society where individuals consistently consider the well-being of others would naturally become more peaceful than one built upon narrow self-interest. He knows this sounds demanding. People often assume such concern is impossible because human beings are naturally selfish. Mozi does not deny that selfishness exists, but he rejects the belief that it is unavoidable. Habits can change. Character can change. Entire societies can change when they begin rewarding cooperation instead of exploitation. Human nature is influenced not only by instinct, but also by education, custom, and example. This belief gives his philosophy an unusual optimism. He refuses to accept that conflict is simply the permanent condition of humanity. Many wars, crimes, and injustices are not inevitable. They arise because people choose values that encourage them. If different values were taught and practiced, different results could follow. His philosophy also places extraordinary importance on usefulness. Mozi constantly asks whether an idea benefits people in real life. Knowledge should help farmers grow food, rulers govern fairly, families live peacefully, and communities remain stable. A philosophy disconnected from everyday life may entertain the intellect, but does little to relieve human suffering. He wants wisdom that can be lived rather than merely admired. This practical attitude shapes his understanding of leadership as well. A ruler should never seek personal glory at the expense of the people. The purpose of government is not to increase the prestige of those in power, but to create conditions in which ordinary people can live safely and peacefully. When leaders pursue unnecessary wars, excessive luxury, or selfish ambition, it is always the population that pays the greatest price. Because of this, he strongly opposes aggressive warfare. He finds it strange that individuals condemn theft while praising military conquest. If stealing a single possession from a neighbor is considered wrong, how could taking entire cities and countless lives suddenly become honorable simply because it is done by an army? The scale of violence does not make it more acceptable. It makes it more tragic. He also questions the value of extravagance. Wealth itself is not the problem. The problem begins when enormous resources are wasted on displays of luxury, while ordinary people struggle to survive. Lavish palaces, unnecessary ceremonies, and endless displays of status may impress observers, but they contribute little to the well-being of society. Resources should first serve the needs of the people before satisfying the desires of the powerful. His concern for ordinary life extends to work itself. Every member of society has responsibilities, and every honest form of labor deserves respect. Farmers, craftsmen, builders, teachers, and officials all contribute to the common good when they perform their roles with integrity. A healthy society depends less on grand speeches than on countless people quietly fulfilling their responsibilities every day. Throughout these ideas runs a consistent principle. The value of an action depends upon whether it benefits people collectively. This does not mean pleasing everyone or avoiding difficult decisions. It means asking a straightforward question before acting. Will this reduce suffering or increase it? Will it strengthen society or weaken it? Will it help people live better lives or make their burdens heavier? Philosophy should always remain close enough to reality to answer those questions honestly. For Mozi, wisdom is measured less by brilliance than by usefulness. The greatest ideas are not those that impress scholars alone, but those that improve the lives of ordinary people. A just society is built one decision at a time, one act of fairness at a time, and one choice to value another person's well-being alongside one's own. That is where philosophy finds its true purpose, not in distant speculation, but in making the world more humane than it was before. The idea of impartial care is often misunderstood because people imagine that Mozi is asking human beings to love every stranger exactly as they love their own family. That is not the heart of his philosophy. His concern is much more practical. He asks what kind of world would exist if people refuse to harm others simply because those others belong to a different family, village, or nation. Much of human suffering begins with the belief that some lives matter far more than others. Once that belief takes root, injustice becomes surprisingly easy to justify. He invites people to reverse this way of thinking. Before asking what another person can do for you, ask what kind of society everyone would live in if they treated one another with fairness instead of partiality. If every family respected every other family, theft would become less common. If every community valued the well-being of neighboring communities, violence would lose many of its causes. If rulers cared about the lives of foreign citizens as seriously as they cared about their own, wars of conquest would become much harder to defend. For Mozi, morality is not measured by beautiful words, but by visible results. A principle is only as valuable as the life it creates. An idea that increases peace deserves to be preserved. An idea that repeatedly produces suffering should be questioned, no matter how old or respected it may be. This practical attitude runs through all of his philosophy. He is far less interested in endless debate than in discovering what genuinely improves human life. This is why he speaks so often about benefit. Modern readers sometimes hear that word and imagine selfish advantage, but Mozi means something much broader. A beneficial action is one that allows people to live with greater security, dignity, and stability. It is beneficial because it serves the common good rather than the interests of a small group. A wise society should encourage actions that strengthen everyone instead of rewarding those that enrich only a few. His criticism of war grows naturally from this belief. Victory on a battlefield may bring territory, wealth, or political influence, yet those gains often hide an enormous human cost. Behind every campaign stand grieving families, destroyed homes, empty fields, and lives that can never be restored. Mozi refuses to celebrate these losses simply because they occur under the banner of national ambition. A ruler should be remembered for protecting life, not for sacrificing it unnecessarily. The same concern appears in his view of government. Authority exists to serve the people, not the other way around. When leaders become more interested in displaying power than in solving the problems of ordinary citizens. They have forgotten the purpose of leadership. A stable society is built through justice, honesty, and competence, not through fear or extravagance. Because of this, Mozi believes that positions of responsibility should be given to those who are capable rather than merely those who are well-connected or born into influential families. Talent and integrity are more valuable than ancestry. A society that ignores ability in favor of privilege weakens itself because it places important decisions in the wrong hands. Good leadership depends upon character and wisdom, not social status. He also believes that example is stronger than command. People rarely become better simply because they are told to do so. They learn by observing the conduct of those around them. When rulers are honest, honesty spreads more easily. When parents act with kindness, children learn kindness naturally. When respected members of society behave with fairness, fairness becomes something others wish to imitate. Character moves through communities in quiet ways that laws alone cannot achieve. This gives his philosophy an enduring optimism. Human beings are capable of improving themselves because they are capable of learning from one another. Every act of justice encourages another. Every act of generosity reminds others that generosity is possible. A better society does not appear overnight. It grows gradually as ordinary people choose habits that strengthen trust instead of destroying it. For Mozi, philosophy must always return to this simple test. Does an idea help people live together more peacefully? Does it reduce suffering instead of increasing it? Does it encourage fairness instead of selfishness? If the answer is yes, then the idea deserves serious attention. If the answer is no, then even the most impressive theory has lost sight of what philosophy is ultimately meant to accomplish. Mozi also believes that one of the greatest mistakes a society can make is to admire appearances more than substance. People are often impressed by grand ceremonies, expensive clothing, magnificent buildings, or elegant speeches. These things can create the illusion of greatness while hiding deep injustice beneath the surface. A nation may look prosperous while its people struggle to survive. A leader may appear powerful while governing without wisdom. Mozi urges people to look beyond appearances and judge everything by its real effect on human life. This explains why he often criticizes extravagance. He does not oppose beauty or celebrations simply because they are pleasant. His concern is with misplaced priorities. If enormous wealth is spent on luxury while families lack food, shelter, or security, then something has gone wrong. Resources should first relieve suffering before satisfying vanity. A society reveals its true values not through its finest palaces, but through the condition of its ordinary people. His practical outlook extends to work as well. Every honest occupation has dignity because every useful task contributes to the well-being of others. A farmer who grows food, a builder who constructs homes, a craftsperson who creates essential tools, or a teacher who shares knowledge all strengthen society in meaningful ways. No contribution should be dismissed simply because it lacks prestige. The health of a community depends upon countless ordinary acts performed faithfully every day. This respect for usefulness also shapes his understanding of education. Learning should never become an exercise in displaying intelligence. Knowledge that cannot improve judgment or guide action remains incomplete. The truly educated person is not the one who speaks with the most impressive vocabulary, but the one who makes wiser decisions, treats others more fairly, and contributes something valuable to the world around them. He is equally concerned with the danger of blind tradition. Customs often deserve respect because they preserve the experience of earlier generations. Yet age alone does not make an idea correct. A harmful practice does not become good simply because it has existed for a long time. Every tradition should be examined by the same question that guides the rest of his philosophy. Does it benefit people? If it does, preserve it. If it repeatedly produces suffering, have the courage to change it. This willingness to question established habits makes his philosophy unusually independent. He does not measure truth by popularity or by ancient authority. He measures it by its consequences. A wise person must be prepared to challenge accepted opinions whenever they conflict with justice, compassion, or the common good. That requires courage because societies rarely welcome those who question comfortable assumptions. Mozi also understands that peace is not created merely by ending conflict. Peace must be supported by fairness. When people believe they are constantly being treated unjustly, resentment quietly grows beneath the surface. Lasting harmony, therefore, depends upon building relationships founded on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Laws can discourage wrongdoing, but they cannot create genuine goodwill. That must be cultivated through daily conduct. His philosophy asks people to think beyond themselves without asking them to abandon themselves. Caring for others does not require neglecting one's own family or responsibilities. Instead, it means refusing to believe that the well-being of others is unimportant. A society becomes stronger when compassion extends beyond the narrow boundaries of personal interest. The more widely concern is shared, the less room remains for needless hostility. Throughout his thought, there is a remarkable confidence that ordinary people possess the ability to improve the world around them. Lasting change does not depend solely upon extraordinary rulers or famous thinkers. It begins whenever individuals choose honesty instead of deception, fairness instead of favoritism, cooperation instead of selfishness, and service instead of personal gain. Small actions repeated across an entire society gradually become powerful enough to reshape it. For Mozi, philosophy is never an escape from reality. It is a guide for living within it. Every idea must eventually return to the marketplace, the family, the workshop, the fields, and the halls of government. If it cannot make those places more just, more peaceful, and more humane, then it has failed its purpose. A truly wise philosophy does not merely explain the world. It helps people build a better one. Mozi leaves behind a philosophy that is remarkable for its simplicity and its courage. He does not ask whether an idea is elegant or whether it has been admired for generations. He asks a more difficult question. Does it make life better for ordinary people? If it does, it deserves to be preserved. If it brings unnecessary suffering, then it should be abandoned, no matter how ancient or respected it may be. Throughout his philosophy, concern for others remains the central thread. Human beings naturally care for those closest to them, but they should not allow that care to become an excuse for ignoring everyone else. A society cannot flourish if every family seeks only its own advantage, or if every nation believes its own interests justify harming others. Peace becomes possible only when people recognize that the lives of others carry the same value as their own. This belief also shapes his understanding of justice. Justice is not measured by impressive speeches or written laws alone. It is measured by the way people actually treat one another. A government that protects only the powerful has failed its purpose. A community that rewards selfishness should not be surprised when trust disappears. Real justice appears in ordinary actions repeated every day. Keeping promises, acting fairly, helping those in need, and refusing to take advantage of others simply because one has the opportunity. His philosophy also reminds us that wisdom should never become separated from usefulness. Knowledge reaches its highest value when it eases suffering, strengthens communities, and encourages people to live together with greater respect. Learning that remains trapped inside books has not yet completed its journey. It must eventually become action. Perhaps this is why Mozi continues to feel surprisingly modern. The questions he asked are still the questions every generation must answer. Should leaders pursue power or serve the people? Should wealth exist only for luxury, or should it improve the lives of society as a whole? Should differences between individuals become reasons for conflict or opportunities to practice fairness? These questions remain as urgent today as they were more than 2,000 years ago. He never imagines that a perfect society can be created overnight. Human beings will always struggle with selfishness, pride, and conflict. Yet he refuses to believe these weaknesses define humanity forever. People are capable of learning. Communities are capable of changing. Good examples inspire better habits, and better habits slowly shape better societies. Progress begins with ordinary choices made consistently over time. In the end, Mozi invites us to judge our lives by a simple standard. Did our actions reduce suffering or increase it? Did we leave people safer than we found them? Did we use our abilities for our own advantage alone? Or did we help create a world where others could also live with dignity and peace? These are not questions reserved for rulers or philosophers. They belong to everyone. His final message is both practical and hopeful. A better world is not built through grand promises, but through countless acts of fairness, compassion, honesty, and responsibility. When people choose to care beyond themselves, when leaders place the well-being of their people above personal ambition, and when wisdom is measured by the good it accomplishes rather than the admiration it receives, philosophy becomes more than an intellectual pursuit. It becomes a quiet force capable of transforming everyday life, one thoughtful decision at a time. Most philosophers begin by asking how human beings can become wiser. Mozi began by asking a far more uncomfortable question. Why do people keep hurting one another? Why do kingdoms wage endless wars while claiming to seek peace? Why do rulers enrich themselves while ordinary families struggle to survive? Why do people care deeply about their own children, yet ignore the suffering of everyone else's? Why does intelligence so often become a tool for selfishness instead of compassion? These are not abstract questions for Mozi. They were the reality of the world around him. And unlike many philosophers who accepted suffering as an unavoidable part of human existence, Mozi believed much of it was completely unnecessary. War, poverty, corruption, injustice, and cruelty were not inevitable. They were the consequences of how human beings chose to organize society. If people changed the way they thought, the world itself could change. This simple conviction would make him one of the most radical philosophers in Chinese history. Yet outside China, very few people have heard his name. When people think of ancient Chinese philosophy, they almost always think of Confucius or Laozi. Confucius taught social harmony through tradition and moral cultivation. Laozi invited people to flow gently with the natural order of the universe. Mozi walked in a different direction. He cared less about elegance, less about poetry, less about preserving tradition. He wanted results. If an idea reduced suffering, it deserved attention. If it increased suffering, it should be rejected, no matter how ancient or respected it might be. For a philosopher living more than 2,300 years ago, this was a remarkably practical way of thinking. Mozi was born around 470 BCE during one of the most unstable periods in Chinese history. China was not yet a unified empire. Instead, it was divided among competing states that constantly fought for territory, wealth, and political influence. Alliances formed and collapsed with alarming speed. Kings promised peace while preparing for war. Ordinary people paid the price. Farmers lost their harvests. Families were separated. Cities were destroyed. Generations grew up knowing conflict as the normal condition of life. It was a world where survival often mattered more than justice. Unlike Confucius, who came from the educated elite, Mozi's background appears to have been much more modest. Historians are not completely certain about the details of his early life, but many believe he either came from a family of craftsmen or worked as an artisan himself before becoming a philosopher. This seemingly small detail may explain much about his thinking. Craftsmen learned to judge ideas differently than aristocrats. A beautiful design means little if it cannot actually function. An elegant theory means little if it collapses in practice. Reality becomes the ultimate test. Mozi carried this attitude into philosophy. He was less interested in whether an idea sounded impressive than whether it genuinely improved human life. As he traveled across different states, he observed something that disturbed him deeply. Every ruler claimed to govern for the good of the people. Every government claimed to value justice. Every army claimed to fight for peace. Yet everywhere he looked, suffering continued growing. There was a contradiction between words and reality. Mozi refused to ignore it. He believed philosophers had become too comfortable discussing virtue, while ordinary people endured hunger, violence, and fear. What good is wisdom? He wondered if it never reaches the people who need it most. This question transformed his understanding of philosophy itself. For Mozi, philosophy was not entertainment for intellectuals. It was a tool for solving human problems. This practical spirit made him one of history's earliest systematic social critics. He examined governments not by how glorious they appeared, but by how effectively they protected ordinary lives. He judged policies by their consequences rather than their intentions. Good intentions alone were never enough. A ruler might sincerely believe he was helping his people while actually making their lives worse. Results mattered. This way of thinking feels strikingly modern. Even today, societies often become trapped in arguments about ideology while forgetting to ask a simpler question. Is this actually helping people? Mozi insisted that every custom, every tradition, every law, and every institution should ultimately be judged by whether it increased human well-being. If it did, preserve it. If it did not, change it. This commitment often brought him into conflict with Confucian scholars. Confucius emphasized elaborate rituals, ceremonies, music, and ancient traditions because he believed they cultivated moral character and social harmony. Mozi respected morality, but he questioned whether expensive ceremonies truly benefited ordinary people. Imagine a kingdom where citizens struggle to find enough food while enormous wealth is spent on magnificent funerals, lavish celebrations, and elaborate rituals. Would that really honor virtue? Or would those resources be better used feeding hungry families? These were dangerous questions because they challenged the priorities of powerful elites. Mozi believed too much attention had been given to appearances while too little attention had been given to human suffering. He argued that genuine morality should always produce practical compassion. Virtue should not merely look beautiful. It should improve lives. Gradually, students gathered around him. Unlike many philosophical schools that remained relatively small, Mohism developed into one of the largest intellectual movements in ancient China. His followers became famous not only for studying philosophy, but also for extraordinary discipline, engineering skill, mathematics, military defense, and public service. They were thinkers, but they were also problem solvers. If a small city faced invasion, Mohi scholars sometimes traveled there to help design defensive strategies that protected civilians from larger armies. This reflected Mozi's deepest conviction. Knowledge carries responsibility. Understanding should always serve humanity. As his influence spread across China, one idea slowly emerged above all others. It was an idea so bold that even today it continues challenging the way people think about family, politics, justice, and morality. Mozi believed the root of nearly every human conflict could be traced to one simple habit. People care too much about themselves and not enough about everyone else. From that single observation, he would build one of the most radical ethical philosophies the ancient world had ever seen. The idea that eventually became the heart of Mozi's philosophy sounds almost impossible when heard for the first time. Love everyone equally. Not your family first. Not your nation first. Not your tribe first. Everyone. At first, this seems unrealistic, perhaps even unnatural. Human beings instinctively give special attention to those closest to them. Parents naturally protect their own children before strangers. Friends care more deeply about one another than about people they have never met. Entire societies are built around loyalty to one's own community. Mozi understood this instinct. but he also believed it was the source of countless human tragedies. He asked people to imagine a simple situation. If every father cared only about his own family, why would he hesitate to steal food from another family during desperate times? If every kingdom cared only about its own prosperity, why would it hesitate to invade weaker neighbors? If every official cared only about advancing his own career, why would he risk his position to protect ordinary citizens? The pattern appeared everywhere. Self-interest expanded into family interest. Family interest expanded into tribal interest. Tribal interest expanded into national interest. Eventually, entire civilizations justified violence simply because the victims belonged to someone else's group. Mozi believed the problem was not hatred itself. The deeper problem was partiality. People divided humanity into circles. Those inside the circle deserved compassion. Those outside it mattered less. From this observation, he developed what became his most famous teaching: impartial care. This did not mean loving every person with exactly the same emotion. Mozi was far too realistic to expect that. He understood that parents naturally feel a unique bond with their children. Rather, he argued that every human life deserves equal moral concern. When making decisions, people should ask not merely what benefits themselves or their own group, but what benefits everyone affected. It was a breathtakingly ambitious idea. Imagine if rulers valued foreign citizens as much as their own. Imagine if merchants refused dishonest profit because strangers deserve fairness too. Imagine if judges ignored wealth and status while making decisions. Imagine if nations measured success not only by their own prosperity, but by the reduction of suffering everywhere. Mozi knew this vision sounded difficult, but he also believed history had already demonstrated the alternative. Partiality produced endless conflict. Impartial care offered the possibility of peace. Modern listeners may notice similarities to ideas that appeared centuries later in different parts of the world. Yet Mozi reached these conclusions independently, through observation rather than tradition. He was constantly asking the same practical question: what actually reduces suffering? This habit separated him from many philosophers. He judged moral ideas by their consequences. If an ethical principle made ordinary life safer, more stable, and more compassionate, then it possessed value. If it increased misery, then however beautiful it sounded, something had gone wrong. This practical spirit shaped another remarkable aspect of his philosophy: his fierce opposition to offensive war. Throughout history, conquerors have often described war as glorious. They speak of honor, victory, destiny, and greatness. Young men are told heroic stories while older leaders draw maps from distant palaces. Mozi stripped away this romantic language. He asked people to look at war from the perspective of those who actually experienced it. The farmer whose crops burn before harvest. The mother waiting for someone who never returns. Children growing up without parents. Cities reduced to ashes. Knowledge lost forever because libraries become smoke. He saw no glory in unnecessary conquest, only suffering. This made him one of history's earliest and most systematic critics of aggressive warfare. He posed a question that still feels uncomfortable today. If it is wrong for one person to steal from another, how does that action become righteous simply because an entire army does it? If murder is condemned between individuals, why should thousands of deaths suddenly become honorable when ordered by rulers? His arguments forced people to confront contradictions they preferred not to examine. Not everyone appreciated this. Powerful states often depended upon military expansion. Victorious generals gained prestige. Conquering rulers accumulated wealth. Mozi's philosophy threatened these ambitions because it judged success differently. The greatest ruler was not the one who expanded borders. It was the one who reduced unnecessary suffering. Remarkably, Mozi did more than criticize war. He tried to prevent it. Historical traditions describe him and his followers traveling enormous distances whenever they learned that a smaller state faced invasion. Instead of joining battles, they offered defensive expertise. Mohist engineers became famous for designing fortifications, defensive machines, and practical strategies that discouraged attackers while protecting civilians. This was philosophy in action. Ideas were meant to save lives, not merely win arguments. The same practical approach shaped his views on government. Mozi believed leadership should never depend primarily upon noble birth or family connections. Capability mattered more than ancestry. Integrity mattered more than status. This was a radical challenge to societies where power often passed through inherited privilege. He argued that talented people should be chosen because they could govern wisely, not because they belonged to powerful families. Looking back from the modern world, this seems almost obvious. Yet in his own time, it questioned one of the deepest assumptions about political authority. Human worth, Mozi believed, is demonstrated through actions rather than inherited position. A ruler who governs poorly cannot hide behind an impressive family tree. A common citizen who serves others wisely possesses genuine excellence regardless of birth. As his movement continued growing, Mohist communities became known for extraordinary discipline. Their members lived simply, worked collectively, and devoted themselves to practical service. They rejected luxury not because comfort itself was evil, but because excessive luxury often came at the expense of those already struggling. To Mozi, every unnecessary extravagance carried an invisible cost. While one palace became more magnificent, another village remained hungry, while rulers competed over displays of wealth. Ordinary families wondered how they would survive the coming winter. He kept returning to the same quiet question. Could these resources relieve suffering instead? Again and again, his philosophy redirected attention away from appearances and back toward human well-being. For Mozi, this was the true purpose of wisdom. Not admiration, not prestige, not intellectual victory, but the steady reduction of unnecessary suffering wherever human beings possess the power to prevent it. This conviction would eventually place him in direct opposition to many of the most influential ideas of his own age. It would also ensure that, more than 2,000 years later, his voice still challenges anyone willing to ask one profoundly uncomfortable question. What would the world look like if we cared about strangers almost as seriously as we care about ourselves? As Mozi grew older, his philosophy became even more radical because he began questioning not only how people behaved, but why societies admired the things they did. He looked around the kingdoms of ancient China and saw rulers competing to build larger palaces while villages struggled through famine. He saw nobles surrounding themselves with musicians, elaborate ceremonies, and expensive luxuries while farmers worked endlessly simply to survive another season. Most people accepted this as the natural order of the world. Mozi did not. He asked a question that few powerful people enjoy hearing. Who actually benefits from all of this? Again and again, he measured every custom by its consequences. If a tradition brought harmony, protected families, and reduced suffering, it deserved respect. If it existed mainly to display wealth, strengthen pride, or entertain those already privileged while others suffered, then no amount of history could justify it. This placed him in direct conflict with Confucian philosophy. Confucius believed rituals, music, and ceremonial traditions helped cultivate moral character. Mozi believed that they often became distractions from urgent human needs. He did not reject beauty itself. He rejected beauty that ignored suffering. Imagine a kingdom where children go hungry while enormous fortunes are spent decorating royal halls. Imagine leaders organizing magnificent celebrations while ordinary workers cannot afford medicine. Imagine governments investing endlessly in symbols of prestige while neglecting the lives of the people who make the nation possible. Mozi believed this represented a profound moral failure. A civilization should never be judged by the splendor of its rulers. It should be judged by the well-being of its weakest citizens. That idea still feels remarkably modern. Even today, nations often celebrate economic growth while millions remain isolated, overworked, or unable to meet basic needs. Companies announce record profits while employees struggle to pay rent. Political speeches celebrate success while ordinary people quietly wonder whether anyone truly understands their lives. Mozi would probably ask the same question he asked more than 2,000 years ago. If prosperity does not improve human lives, what exactly is it for? His philosophy consistently returned attention to ordinary people. Unlike many thinkers who wrote mainly for kings and scholars, Mozi never lost sight of farmers, laborers, craftsmen, widows, children, and those who rarely appeared in official histories. He believed philosophy had failed if it could not improve the daily lives of those carrying society on their shoulders. This practical compassion shaped another remarkable aspect of his thinking. He believed ability mattered more than status. The son of a noble family should not automatically receive power simply because of his birth, nor should a gifted and honest person remain ignored simply because they were born poor. Talent, integrity, and competence should determine leadership. This sounds obvious to many modern listeners because ideas such as merit and equal opportunity have become deeply influential. But during Mozi's lifetime, these arguments challenged deeply rooted assumptions about hierarchy and privilege. He understood something timeless. When positions are awarded through favoritism rather than ability, entire societies begin weakening from within. The most capable people become discouraged. The least capable often rise. Gradually, institutions lose the trust of those they are meant to serve. For Mozi, justice was never an abstract ideal floating above ordinary life. Justice was practical. It affected harvests, families, education, peace, health, security, everything. His followers reflected this philosophy in remarkable ways. Unlike many philosophical schools whose students mainly debated ideas, Mohists developed reputations as engineers, builders, mathematicians, diplomats, and defenders of vulnerable cities. They believed knowledge should produce action. If someone understood how to prevent suffering but refused to help, had they truly understood anything at all? This question quietly transformed philosophy into service. Perhaps this explains why Mohism spread so rapidly across ancient China. It offered something concrete, not only theories, solutions. Its members became known for discipline, honesty, and willingness to travel wherever they were needed. They crossed dangerous territories not to seek wealth or political influence, but to prevent wars, advise rulers, strengthen defenses, and protect innocent lives. There is something deeply moving about this image. A community of philosophers carrying tools instead of swords, using intelligence not to dominate others, but to reduce fear. As the years passed, however, Mozi began realizing how difficult his vision truly was. Human beings naturally divide themselves into families, communities, religions, classes, nations. Every group develops loyalty to its own members. There is beauty in that loyalty, but there is also danger, because the moment compassion stops at the edge of one's own circle, someone outside that circle begins to matter less. History repeats this pattern endlessly. Different names, different flags, different languages, the same human instinct. Mozi spent his life trying to break that pattern. He believed that civilization could only become truly peaceful when people expanded their concern beyond those who looked, believed, or lived as they did. It was an extraordinarily demanding ideal, perhaps impossible to achieve perfectly. But for Mozi, the value of an ideal did not depend on reaching perfection. It depended on whether moving toward it made humanity better. And that conviction would become the enduring heart of his legacy, surviving long after kingdoms disappeared and dynasties faded into history. The final years of Mozi's life remain partly hidden behind history. Ancient records tell us far less about his last days than they do about many other great philosophers. We do not know every place he traveled, every conversation he held, or the exact moment when his remarkable life came to an end. Yet perhaps there is something fitting about this. Mozi never sought personal glory. Unlike rulers who built monuments to preserve their names, he wanted his ideas to survive because they could reduce suffering, not because they brought him fame. In many ways, his own life reflected the values he taught. He lived simply. He worked tirelessly. He judged himself not by status, but by usefulness. While many philosophers hoped to be admired for their wisdom, Mozi hoped wisdom itself would become useful enough to improve ordinary lives. That distinction is profound. History often celebrates those who change the map of the world. Mozi wanted to change the heart of the world. As centuries passed, however, his school gradually declined. During the Qin and Han dynasties, Confucianism became the dominant philosophy of government. Confucian scholars shaped education, politics, and public life, while Mohism slowly faded from the center of Chinese intellectual culture. Many of its writings were lost, and generations grew up knowing far more about Confucius than about the philosopher who had once been his greatest rival. For a long time, it seemed as though Mozi had disappeared from history. But powerful ideas rarely vanish completely. They wait. Centuries later, scholars began rediscovering his works and were surprised by how modern many of his arguments sounded. His criticism of aggressive war echoed through later peace movements. His belief that leaders should be chosen because of ability rather than birth anticipated ideas of merit that would shape many later societies. His insistence that governments exist to improve the lives of ordinary people resembles principles that continue to influence political philosophy today. Most striking of all was his doctrine of impartial care. The world still struggles with the very problem that concerned him more than 2,000 years ago. People naturally divide humanity into groups. My family, my religion, my nation, my people. There is nothing wrong with loving those closest to us. Mozi understood that completely. His concern was what happened next. When concern stops there, indifference begins somewhere else. And indifference is often the first step toward injustice. The greatest tragedies in history rarely begin because ordinary people suddenly become monsters. More often they begin because suffering is reserved for someone outside our circle of concern. Once another person's pain feels distant, it becomes easier to ignore. Once it becomes easier to ignore, it becomes easier to justify. Mozi spent his entire life trying to expand that circle. He believed moral progress was not measured by how intensely we loved a few people, but by how widely we extended our sense of responsibility. This idea remains deeply challenging. Modern life constantly encourages comparison, competition, and division. We are taught to think about personal success, personal achievement, personal advantage. Technology allows us to communicate with millions of people, yet can also make strangers feel more distant than ever. Entire societies become polarized, each convinced that only its own side deserves understanding. Mozi would probably ask a question that sounds almost disarmingly simple. What if every decision began by asking who might suffer because of it? Not only ourselves, everyone. He was also one of the earliest philosophers to insist that ideas should be tested by their consequences rather than by their elegance. A beautiful theory that leaves people hungry is not truly beautiful. A tradition that produces unnecessary suffering deserves to be questioned. A government that protects its own power while neglecting its people has forgotten its purpose. This practical wisdom gives his philosophy an unusual freshness. He reminds us that intelligence without compassion easily becomes manipulation. Compassion without wisdom may become ineffective. But when clear thinking and genuine concern for others work together, societies become capable of extraordinary progress. Perhaps that is why Mozi continues to matter. He speaks to an age of enormous technological achievement, but persistent human division. He reminds us that building more powerful machines is easier than building more generous hearts. Creating wealth is easier than distributing justice. Winning arguments is easier than reducing suffering. And throughout his life, He refused to confuse these achievements. When Mozi died, sometime in the early 4th century BCE, he left behind no empire, no palace, and no army. He left something quieter, a challenge that has crossed more than 2,000 years without losing its force. Can we care about people we will never meet? Can we measure success by the lives improved rather than the power accumulated? Can we judge governments, traditions, and even ourselves by one enduring standard? Do our choices leave the world with less suffering than before? Perhaps that is why Mozi remains one of history's most remarkable philosophers. He did not ask humanity to become more intelligent for the sake of pride. He asked humanity to become wiser for the sake of compassion. And in a world that still struggles with war, inequality, prejudice, and indifference, his quiet voice continues to offer the same timeless invitation. Expand the circle of your concern, and you may discover that the path to a better society begins with the simple decision to treat every human life as though it truly matters.